In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. O Heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of truth, whatever we're present, filling all things, treasure of blessings, and giver of life. Come and abide in us and cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls, O good one. Christ is in our midst.
He is in our shadow.
So, I am proposing to talk, or to lead a discussion, I hope, under the topic, the biblical vision of creation, of human nature and destiny. Does that sound like we can handle that? That's why, we have some people who are new, not just Rob, but a couple of others. In fact, here they come now. Let's put them on the spot. And so this is Kyle's second catechism class. This is Anna's first catechism class. This is Rob's first catechism class. So we have, it's like a one-room schoolhouse, trying to deal with, trying to address many different levels of station. So I feel that I'm still burdened, if you will, by the desire to present to you the world of the Bible. Get you into the world of the Bible. Get you into the tomb of the Lord. So I hope that these notes I have, I hope that it will be edifying to all of you, whatever stage you might be. So let's begin. Let's turn to, in your Orthodox study Bibles, the Wisdom of Solomon. Okay, that's not an Orthodox study Bible.
I'll look everywhere. I
couldn't find them? Darn it. They gotta be somewhere.
They're in a box somewhere.
They were in a box?
Yeah, in a small box.
I've got it on my phone.
Thank you.
So, Wisdom of Solomon, if you have the Orthodox study Bible, let's turn to chapter 13. Wisdom of Solomon. And we're going to start with verses 1, and I think go through verse 10. I've had some very enjoyable conversations with our newcomers. We've got a fine group of inquirers that have been coming the last few Sundays. They're sharp, they're thinkers, they're young. And that's what's the most encouraging. Actually, they're young. They're not swallowing the Kool-Aid. They are thinking for themselves, and that is what has largely brought them to the Orthodox Church in their search. And there's one of our inquirers in particular who I thought would be interested in reading and seeing this. Chapter 13, the Wisdom of Solomon, starting with verse 1. My translation goes like this. Surely vain are all men by nature who are ignorant of God. Does that look like what you've got? It's probably a different translation. Cindy, what do you have? 13:1, Wisdom of Solomon.
For all men, while ignorant of God.
Okay. Yeah, it's the same one. So you can follow along. You might have to struggle a bit to follow along. It sounds like your translation is quite a bit different. But you can get the general gist of it. Surely vain are all men by nature who are ignorant of God, and could not, out of the good things that are seen, know him that is. Neither by considering the works did they acknowledge the workmaster, but deemed either fire, or wind, or the swift air, or the circle of the stars, or the violent water, or the lights of heaven, to be the gods which govern the world. Do you recognize that at all,
Yeah.
you students of philosophy? Never mind. students of, do we have any students of philosophy that could place the time period of this? Because they were, because these are the, it was in, well, let's say, philosophy begins as cosmogony. In other words, how does the world come to be? What is it that constitutes the world, the cosmos? And different solutions were offered, and some suggested water, some suggested fire, some suggested air, some suggested earth, some suggested a circle. But they meant, by that they meant the revolution of the stars, the movement of the stars. And then others put all of them together and say that somehow they're all of them together are what constitute the cosmos and the stuff that makes the cosmos to be what it is. The stuff that makes the one, or let's say the one, to be what the many are. The one and the many. That was the ancient riddle of philosophy, the one and the many. So this tells us that the Wisdom of Solomon is being written in that time period, and it's being addressed to the philosophy, the schools of philosophy around the Mediterranean. And Alexandria in Egypt, which is where there's a large community of Jews, was a major center for these philosophers, for these schools of philosophy, as well as Athens and Thessaloniki. With whose beauty, if they being delighted took them to be gods, let them know how much better the Lord of them is. For the first author of beauty has created them. But if they were astonished at their power and virtue, let them understand by them how much mightier He is that made them. For by the greatness and beauty of the creatures, proportionably the Maker of them is seen. But yet for this they are the less to be blamed, for they are peradventure, peradventure they err, seeking God, desirous to find Him. For being conversant in His works, they search Him diligently, and believe, but they believe their sight, because the things are beautiful that are seen. Howbeit, neither are they to be pardoned. For if they were able to know so much, that they could aim at the world, how did they not sooner find out the Lord thereof? So do you think that maybe St. Paul is referring to this passage in Romans chapter 1, when he says that the ancients, the evidence of God is right before them, so that they could have found them if they looked for them diligently. So this is telling us, if you will, it's describing two different views of the world. Two different views of the world in terms of how the world came to be. So you tell me, what two views of the world do you see and how would you describe them? How would you describe the one world in terms of how it came to be and the other world and how it came to be? How would you describe it? What would you say?
In this passage or just like in general?
What's that?
In this passage here?
Yeah, in this passage, yeah, what is this saying? It's presenting us two different views of the world.
Well, the first one's philosophical.
Okay, and the philosophical is saying the world comes to be by what? Or how?
I don't know, it speaks of the elements, you know?
Okay.
So that's indicative of that.
So the gods are the elements.
Right. Yeah, or in charge of them or something like that.
What does it say? They deemed these, fire, wind, air, circle of the stars, or the violet water, or the lights of heaven, these they considered to be the gods which govern the world. Okay? So that's one view. Can you discern the other view that's in this passage as to how the world came to be and what it's constituted of?
Creator's view.
Yes, the Creator. So it's not wind, air, fire, earth, circle of stars. It's none of the things that are seen. Right? That creates, it's the unseen, the author of beauty. Does this remind you of anything that we have read over the last, 6 months now? Going back to September. Remember the Liber Gaudium? The visible opens onto the invisible realm of the heart, which opens onto the invisible realm of heaven. Can you see the visible and the invisible here in Wisdom chapter 13? Now, see, I wish one of our inquirers were here. She's really sharp. I enjoy talking to her. Those who know her will recognize her as I describe her. I'm not going to name her name. I don't want to put her on the spot. But she was looking for meaning, and she was drawn into quantum physics, and found herself being drawn into nihilism. And somehow, intuitively, she knew she didn't want to go there, so she drew back. So I was having a conversation with her on Sunday, and I asked her, I described briefly, from the Liber Graduum, the 3 different levels: the visible, in other words, what's seen; the invisible realm of the heart; and the invisible realm of heaven. And I asked her, so now on what level would you put quantum physics? So I ask you, on what level would you put quantum physics?
It's the scene.
Very good, Matthew. Explain yourself.
Well, I mean, you can't operate in that realm if you don't have some sort of physical evidence to make your claims and have your proofs or whatever.
Okay.
So it's always going to be on the physical level.
That leaves 2 realms of reality unspoken for, right?
Yeah.
And yet how many would take quantum physics or metaphysics or science as the sum total of all reality?
That's all we have in our world, though.
That's all we can see.
In the secular world, that's all there is.
That's all they know.
Yeah,
that's all that they know. But now see, so now listen to Wisdom of Solomon. Mm-hmm. With whose beauty, if they being delighted, took them to be gods, let them know how much better the Lord of them is. Let's see, we might want to go up. Actually, starting again up at chapter 13, verse 1. Surely vain, in other words, empty-headed, are all men by nature, who are ignorant of God, and could not, out of the good things that are seen, know him that is. So, the seen, the visible, the cosmos, we're talking about the sum total. This I feel is a very important point. The realm of the visible, as it's described in the Liber Graduum, is the sum total of cosmic reality. Now, cosmic reality includes both material stuff and immaterial stuff, energy, for example. It includes visible and invisible. So when we talk about the visible, or we talk about the sensual, the sensate, we're not just talking about things that you can feel with the 5 senses. We're talking about the sum total of reality. Because even the invisible forces of quantum physics are measured by mathematics, right? So you might say that this world that is being brought forward, which men who are empty-headed take to be the sum total of all things, this world, you might describe this world as being characterized by the fact that it can be measured. Now, so we have this other world that's implicit. I mean, it's not so implicit, but it's not the world that is being emphasized here in this passage. So, for this, let's then go to Wisdom chapter 7. Now, Anna, I want you to pay attention to this. This goes back to a conversation that you and I had. Chapter 7, Wisdom chapter 7. Now let's see. Cindy, you have what everybody else has. You have a nice reading voice. Why don't you read it? Because when I read it, my translation is different from everyone else's. It might be easier to follow you than it is to follow me. Starting with verse 13. Oh, yeah, let's start with verse 13, Cindy. Let's go all the way down to, what do I have? 21? Yes. Mm-hmm. I think this is it.
So,
I'm sorry. Back up. That's not that one. It is Let me get this right. Boy, I'm just really messed up here. It's chapter 9, Cindy. No, I'm sorry. It is chapter 7. It is chapter 7. Okay, Cindy, you were right the first time. 15 to 21. You were right the first time. Stick to your guns, Cindy.
Do you want it 13 or 15?
Let's do 15.
15. Okay. May God grant me to speak according to his purpose, and to think worthily of what I was given. For he is also the guide of wisdom and the corrector of the wise. For both we and our words are in his hand, and so are all insights and knowledge of handicrafts. For he gives me knowledge of the things that exist, to know the truthful structure of the world, the operative power of its elementary principles, the beginning and middle of the times, the changes of the solstices and the transitions of the seasons, the cycles of the year and the arranging of the stars, the natures of animals and tempers of beasts, the force of winds and the reasoning of mankind, the distinction of plants and the strength of roots, and to know whatever is hidden and whatever is visible. For wisdom, the artisan of all things, taught me.
All right, now is that a completely different, quite a different vision of the world? Who's teaching me the vision of the world according to whatever this chapter is, chapter 7? Who's teaching it to me? And then in chapter 13, how am I going to find out the nature of the world? If my view of the world is what is described in chapter 13, how am I going to learn about the world? And if my view of the world is that of chapter 7, how am I going to find out about the world?
Well, in chapter 7, you're relying on God for your knowledge. Wisdom, another word for God.
Wisdom.
Yep.
Wisdom. Or God, or
Jesus.
Or Jesus. And if my view of the world is in chapter 13, how am I going to learn?
I'm going to rely on science.
Yes. Now, you understand that in order to become a student of philosophy in antiquity, if you wanted to learn philosophy, the first things you had to learn were, does anybody know? Mathematics. You had to learn geometry. And I think it was astronomy that you had to learn. And then in one of the schools, to one of the philosophers, there was reportedly inscribed over the portal of the gate that went into the stoa, the school, that no one ignorant of geometry enter. Now, you walk into an Orthodox church. I've never been into St. Mary's. We've been on the outside, but I've never been inside. So I don't know what's inside. You don't find it here. This used to be a Lutheran church, so it has Lutheran bones. But you walk into an Orthodox church that has been constructed according to Orthodox theology from the ground up. You come into the church, you come into the nave, you look up, and what do you see? The Pantocrator, Christ all-powerful. He's this huge icon at the very top of the dome. Now you understand, the nave represents the creation, the whole of cosmos, not the sanctuary. The sanctuary is beyond the cosmos. The nave is the cosmos. So you're standing in the cosmos, you're standing in the creation, and there, you look up there, and there is the Pantocrator. What's that telling you? What's the experience? I mean, this is how my translation goes. In his hand are both we and our words, all wisdom also, and knowledge of workmanship. He's like this. So you come into the nave and you're in his embrace. You're in his embrace. So it's a completely different experience of the world. And as I was explaining to this inquirer, and as I think it's exciting, and I would like to believe that she was excited. Listen, there's a whole nother way of knowing, a whole nother way of thinking, a whole nother way of learning. Now, you've heard me talk about this before, quite at length actually. And this is why I wanted you to be in on this, Anna, because we talked about this. Can you hear in these two passages the who and the what? Where would you put the who? Which one describes the who?
Chapter 7.
Yes, which describes the what?
13.
Yes, and how do you get to know the what? Through geometry. How do you get to know the who? In other words, how do you get to know the world according to he who is, he who made it? Through prayer.
And what's interesting to me then, in light of this, is how the Enlightenment didn't enlighten us at all. It dragged us right into the sciences, and you have to prove it. It's all materialism and all of that, as opposed to enlightenment should be the light of God and understanding.
Amen, Cindy. God bless you. Yes. It was not the enlightenment, it was the endarkening.
It was the unlightenment.
Yes, the enlightenment. Yes, not the enlightenment, the enlightenment. There's this. Now, Rob, you may be one who's not in on this distinction between the who and the what. Allow me real quickly to describe it. Anna, you keep me right. You correct me if I'm wrong. Okay. But from the time that we're in kindergarten through graduate school and beyond, what is it that the schools are teaching us? They're teaching us what it is. What it is. And you learn what it is that makes anything to be what it is. You take some tests, you get enough answers right, and you're declared a graduate. Because you know, at least to some degree, what it is that makes this thing to be what it is. And that is how that's how we think. We breathe the air of the what. But there's a completely different reality. There's another reality. It's the reality of the who, of who we are. And I use the example since we have. Well, I'll talk about me and my wife. Well, I won't embarrass anybody else. But when I met my wife back sophomore in college, we started dating. Of course, my mother had never met Nancy, and she was all excited because her son was finally getting a girlfriend. She didn't have to worry about him anymore. And she wanted to know, who this Nancy is. So, of course, I wanted to describe Nancy to them. And I tried, but I couldn't describe her without just telling, I couldn't say to them who she was without telling them what she was. And that's what you discover when you try to describe somebody. You cannot say who they are. You can only say what they are. And the only way you can get to know who they are is when they finally meet each other, face to face. Now they start getting to know each other. And so here we have who we are. Who we are. Look, and you listen to the way I talk about who we are. I cannot talk about who we are without reducing the who to a what. I talk about it as a concept. The who, the person. I can't talk about it except as a what. And if you were to ask any of us, if you were to ask my wife, tell us who your husband is without telling us what he is, she would not be able to. She just would not be able to. So that the world is known the world is known truly only in the who. He who is. We don't say, here's another thing. In the Far East, the student of the Upanishads, for example, wants to know about God. So he asks this teacher, tell me, what is Brahman? What is God? And the teacher answers, that art thou. In other words, whatever that is, that's what you are. When we ask about God, what do we say? You're not God. He who is God. You're not God, but you're made in his image. You're made in his likeness. You don't know him by dissolving into him. You know him by coming into a personal relationship with him. So we have these two different understandings of reality, of the creation. The understanding of the world, you might say, which is to understand the world in terms of what it is, And so we try to study it, we try to get to know it through different formulas, mathematical formulas or whatever, through science or whatever. Then you have the world as it is known in the Creator, He who is. So on that note, we go to, now let's see, yes, here we go, chapter 6. It's hard to read the verses, the numbers in my translation, my version, that's why I get mixed up on the numbers. They don't have a real distinction between the chapter headings and the verse headings. But let's go to chapter 6. And we can start at verse 13. Matthew, can you read it for us this time?
Yeah.
Chapter 6, verse 13. Let's just do 13 and 14. That's all we need to do.
She comes upon those who long to know her beforehand.
Isn't that interesting?
I'm sorry?
Isn't it interesting? She comes to those, say that again.
She comes upon those who long to know her beforehand.
All right.
He who rises early in the morning to seek her will not grow weary, for he will find her sitting at his gates.
Okay, I love that. I love that. In other words, the principle, that is the root of all reality. The principle of knowledge is...
I like verse 12 as well. Wisdom is radiant and unfading, and is easily perceived by those who love her, for she is found by those who seek her.
That's a bit different from geometry, isn't it? It's desire, it's love, and my point is that I want to make is this is what's right in front of us. It's in front of our nose. This, the principle of knowledge is in front of our nose. It's been in front of our nose all the time, and we miss it because we're looking for what it is that makes it to be what it is. All right. Now, I wanted to show you the picture of St. Porphyrius for no other purpose than to show you him reading the Bible. The point I want to make with that is that knowledge is given to us by a word, by teaching. That's how we receive knowledge. So it makes a difference, does it not, where that word is coming from. If it's coming from the empty-headed ones, who can teach us all about mathematics and science, and they can do wonderful things. They can take somebody's broken, damaged hip, like both of my hips, they can replace them, and you can walk again, thanks to science. But I still don't know who I am. I need a different word from a different source. And so this, the word that teaches us about God, where do you think it's going to come from? Where should it come from? Where could it only come? If it's going to teach us about God, about the Creator, where must it come from? God Himself. It must come from God Himself. If the Word is going to teach us about wisdom, it's wisdom who must be teaching us. And the words that we receive from the teaching, whatever it is that we're being taught, these words, they'll draw a picture in our mind. And that picture gives us a vision of reality. So it's going to make it a difference, is it not, if that picture that is being drawn in my mind is being drawn by wisdom herself. Sophia is feminine in the Greek. Or if it's being drawn in my mind by the talking heads, the mathematicians, the scientists, the philosophers were giving us the theories on about how the world is. It's going to make a difference. And the point that I want to make with that is that in the mystery of coming to know God, the true God, the mind is not put on the shelf at all. Rather, the mind is given a different food to eat. And depending on what the mind eats, what food it eats, whether it's the word of wisdom or the word, I'm going to follow wisdom of Solomon, the empty-headed men, that's going to determine, the state of one's mind and what one knows. And let's see, we can go to verse 12 that Cindy just had us read, but there's also, let's see here, where else was it? Well, we'll come to it. If I don't see it now, we'll come to it. This word of wisdom that is telling us, teaching us the true wisdom, it is kept in the mind, it is guarded in the mind, it is secured in the mind. And this is a huge difference by doing the commandments that wisdom tells us to do. So in other words, the words of knowledge that come to us from wisdom are not just words that we think about. They're words that must be done. They're words that must be exercised by the mind, the soul, and the body. And as one exercises this word, as one actualizes this word of wisdom, that's how the wisdom of God begins to fill and permeate the whole body. And that's when we get into chapter 8 of wisdom we could go to. And we can look at verse 17. When I consider these things in my heart, it says. That's huge. When I consider these things in my heart, you know that prayer in the church is descending with the mind into the heart. You don't descend apart from the mind. You don't leave the mind up here and then go into your heart and become this mindless imbecile. You bring the mind with you into the heart. And the heart is what feeds the mind, or I should say it's the wisdom that is in the heart that is feeding the mind and giving the mind knowledge. But what's fascinating to me is the word here in the Greek here is heart. Let's see, all of these things I considered in myself and I ponder them in my heart. It suggests to me that this principle of prayer that we are introduced to in the Orthodox Church is not invented by the Orthodox Church. It goes all the way back into the Old Testament. This is the principle of prayer that the prophets knew, that they were practicing. I mean, you read it in the Greek, you read it in the Hebrew, the word for heart is all over the place in the Old Testament. And it goes on to say that when I consider these things in myself and ponder them in my heart, it says that it is immortality. It is immortality to be, in kinship, to be interwoven of wisdom, to be a kinfolk, to be a relative, it's syngenia. It's to be really one with wisdom. That's immortality. So, you have it in the Old Testament, this hope of immortality, even this experience, this vision of immortality that comes to us through wisdom, who is Christ. So when Christ becomes flesh, in other words, when wisdom becomes flesh, mind, body, and soul, what is the devout, the righteous one of the Old Testament going to see? What's he going to understand? That this hope of immortality is at hand. It's not being justified by grace through faith. Matthew and I were talking. That's everywhere in the Old Testament. God did not have to become incarnate to justify us by grace through faith. That was in the Old Testament. What was wanted, what was needed was to destroy that barrier of death that separated us from God so that we could not be one with him. But even in the Old Testament, they had this hope from their own experience of the beauty of wisdom that they had in their own heart, that immortality or death, the destruction of death through resurrection, they had that experience in their own heart that this is what was coming. And that this is what this is what wisdom incarnate would be all about. To make real this hope of the righteous, with the wise ones of the Old Testament, that to cling to wisdom is immortality. It's deathlessness. I mean, so what we could go on with that. There's many other things that one could say about that. We're going to end this first session. We're about 2-3 minutes away from our break, as promised. Let's end this session now by taking these points that we've been making and applying them now through 2 Clement. And actually what I would like to do, I would like to read 2 Clement, and then I'd like to read a section from St. Porphyrius. This is on the church. So we're talking about the world of the church. And you'll be, when you read 2 Clement, that's in front of you, and you'll begin to understand why we are talking about creation. And reading 2 Clement in terms of the creation. Where are we? Here we go. So then, brothers, if we do the will of God our Father, we will belong to the first church. Yeah, I wonder if belong is actually too weak. But that's maybe for Theology 200. We'll stick with this. Which was created, the spiritual one, the spiritual church, which was created before the sun and moon. Whoa. But if we do not do the will of the Lord, we will belong to those of whom the Scripture says, my house has become a robber's den. Please note how to be of the church, that is the spiritual church, or not, hinges on my actions, what I do. So let us choose. See, it hinges on what I choose. There's no notion of predestination here in the Calvinistic sense that cancels your will. I mean, Calvinism is monothelitism revisited. It's the canceling of the human will. It's a Christological heresy that was condemned in the 7th century, 681. So here we're in the first half, at least, of the 2nd century with this text. So let us choose, therefore, to belong to the church of life, in order that we may be saved. Now, I do not suppose that you are ignorant of the fact that the living church is the body of Christ. For the Scripture says, God created man, male and female. The male is Christ, the female is the church. Moreover, the books and the apostles declare that the church not only exists now, but has been in existence from the beginning. For she was spiritual, as was also our Jesus, but was revealed in the last days in order that she might save us. Now the church, being spiritual, was revealed in the flesh of Christ, thereby showing us that if any of us guard her in the flesh and do not corrupt her, he will receive her back again in the Holy Spirit. For this flesh is a copy of the Spirit. You hear Liber Graduum, visible, invisible, where the visible is the copy of the invisible, or the visible is the form, if you will, of the invisible. You hear Exodus chapter 25, verses 9 and 40, when Moses is on the mountain, receiving the law, the tablets of the law from God. And God says, you are going to build the temple and do all of its appointments as a copy according to the pattern, the heavenly pattern that I'm showing you. So you see, the visible is the copy of the heavenly. That doesn't mean that they're separate. That means that the one is the form of the other. The other one is the substance of the other. Now the church being spiritual was revealed. Where am I? What line am I on? 14, okay. The church being spiritual was revealed in the flesh of Christ, thereby showing us that if any of us guard her in the flesh and do not corrupt her, he will receive her back again in the Holy Spirit. For this flesh is a copy of the Spirit. No one, therefore, who corrupts the copy will share in the original. The picture here is that of a stamp embossing a piece of clay. And so, the stamp embosses the clay and it creates all these ruts and grooves, right? So if those ruts and grooves are misshapen in any way, then the stamp can't fit in there. So if you corrupt those grooves, well, there's no way that stamp's going to get there. So you want to be careful not to corrupt those grooves. the imprint. This, therefore, is what he means, brothers. Guard the flesh, in order that you may receive the Spirit. And you understand by flesh, we mean body, mind, and soul. We mean the whole human composite, the whole of cosmic reality. Now, if we say that the flesh is the church and the Spirit is Christ, then the one who abuses the flesh abuses the church. Consequently, such a person will not receive the Spirit, which is Christ. So great is the life and immortality which this flesh is able to receive, if the Holy Spirit is closely joined with it, that no one is able to proclaim or to tell what things the Lord has prepared for his chosen ones. Allow me, before we go to break, to read this from St. Porphyrius. As I said, this Christian sermon from St. Clement was in anywhere between 100 to 150 AD. Here is from St. Porphyrius. He died in 1991. So where St. Porphyrius is writing, he's saying these words through, I don't know, 70s, 80s sometime. And so in the 20th century, he says this, and here it's the same teaching that we're finding in St. Clement, 2,000 years later. Same teaching. The church is without beginning, without end, and eternal. Just as the triune God, her founder, is without beginning, without end, and eternal. She is uncreated, just as God is uncreated. She existed before the ages, before the angels, before the creation of the world, before the foundation of the world, as the Apostle Paul says in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4. She is a divine institution, and in her dwells the whole fullness of divinity, Colossians chapter 2, verse 9. She is an expression of the richly varied wisdom of God. She is the mystery of mysteries. She was concealed and was revealed in the last of times. The church remains unshaken because she is rooted in the love and wise providence of God. The three persons of the Holy Trinity constitute the eternal church. The angels and human beings existed in the thought and love of the triune God from the beginning. Okay, now don't be scandalized. He's talking theology, and he's trying to shake your mind here. Don't be scandalized. He says, we human beings were not born now. We existed before the ages in God's omniscience. That doesn't mean that we pre-existed. It means that God knew us even before we were born. He's quoting, the reference would be Psalm 139. So there's this teaching in the Bible, and it carries through into the Holy Fathers, that none of us, if you will, is a surprise to God. And yet, even though we're not a surprise, he does not predetermine. See, that's what caught Calvin. God can't be surprised by anything, so therefore it must be that he predetermines whether you're going to reject him or not. But the mystery of God is even bigger than the mind can comprehend. So somehow he knows without predetermining. We are free. And then for the Fathers, the power of self-determination is the fundamental, essential principle of our having been created in the image of God. So if God cancels our human will, or if he makes it so that we do no longer have the power of choose, we're no longer human. Okay, well I could read more, but I don't have time. But I wanted to give the sense that when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about how this world of the church that we're reading about in St. Clement and in St. Porphyrius, I want us to start talking about, what do you hear in it? What's the vision of, what picture is being painted in your mind? Let's look at that picture when we come back, and let's start bringing that picture out where all of us can see. So let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back about 7:55. Can you see how the church is the sum total of reality? I mean, I'm struck by it. It says God created man, male and female. What's interesting to me is that the biblical source for the imagery of Christ, of the church as the body of Christ, is Genesis 1:27-28. I mean, if you were writing this might be one argument for placing this sermon earlier than later. I don't know. Because you would think that he would be quoting St. Paul, Ephesians 1:23. The church that is the body of Christ, the fullness of him who is all in all. But this tells me, since he's not referring to St. Paul, but he's referring to Genesis, this tells me that this understanding of the church as the heavenly pattern, if you will, of man as male and female, was one of the common teachings of the early church. And that St. Paul, when he uses that imagery of Christ, of the church as the body of Christ, he too has in mind Genesis 1:27-28. And it's all more interesting when you go to the so-called marriage epistle, Ephesians chapter 5, where he's talking about man and woman and how they each, they become flesh of each other's flesh, bone of each other's bones. Well, he's quoting Genesis chapter 2, verse 14, 15, or whatever it is. Maybe not whatever it is, I can't remember the exact verse. But when Adam says, "This is flesh of my flesh, bone of my bones. She shall be called woman because she's taken from man." And then he ends that epistle by saying, you thought I was talking about man and woman. Well, actually, I'm talking about the mystery of Christ in the church. And what I take that to mean is that, the whole of creation is the image of Christ and the church. And the mystery of man as male and female is as the image of Christ and the church. That's what gives gender and sexuality its spiritual meaning, its spiritual value, its spiritual dignity and glory, is that it's in the image and likeness of God somehow. So if I was going to go into this whole question of gender and all that, this is where I would go. I would explore this. This is, I believe, the source of the church's teaching. So you begin to see that gender, man as male and female, is of cosmic spiritual depth. So that's one thing that one notes, how the church is this. It's more than cosmic. It embraces both the created and the uncreated, because he says the first church, the spiritual one, which was created before the sun and the moon. And then you go to St. St. Porphyrius. The church is without beginning, without end, and eternal, just as the triune God, her founder, is without beginning, without end, and eternal. She is uncreated, just as God is uncreated. She existed before the ages, before the angels, before the creation of the world. He goes down one farther. He says the three persons of the Holy Trinity constitute the eternal church. The angels and the human beings existed in the thought and the love of the triune God from the beginning. This is a great mystery. This is a deep mystery, how we exist, how we were known by God. Even, as I said, even Psalm 139, this is even a teaching in the Psalms, Psalm 139. But we are not uncreated, we are created, but nonetheless we are known. But I'm wondering if this gets back to the mystery of the who. God knew who we were from the beginning. We're not what's, we're who's. That's why God knew us from the beginning, from eternity, even before we began to exist. So, the picture that's drawn in your mind, and you can hearken back to Wisdom 13, where it talks about the worldview of the philosophers, that the gods of the world that govern the way that it moves are air, fire, earth, and water. So, I don't know, maybe we're prejudiced, but I don't know, which world jumps at you, and which world seems to be alive, fresh, vibrant, Which world how would you distinguish the two worlds? When you enter into the world of the church, what are you entering into? Who are you entering into? What's going on? Right? You see what I'm driving at? You're entering into the mystery of God, the Holy Trinity. You're entering into the mystery of Christ incarnate, of wisdom, the Creator becoming flesh and destroying death by his death, and thereby fulfilling the hope of all the righteous. that by loving and cleaving to wisdom, they would acquire immortality. So you begin to understand, you begin to see that the church, she's not a human institution. She's not a business organization. She's not a social club. She is this mystery of life. Actually, she's the reality in which we find ourselves as we have been known by God even before, long before we knew ourselves. When God knew us. And you see how the visible world, the material world, the cosmic world, embracing the sum total of cosmic reality. You see what it's founded on. You see what it's grounded on. The cosmic reality of the world is grounded in the mystery of the Holy Trinity. The who, begetting the who, and spirating the who. And then the second who, becoming flesh, becoming what we are, in the who of the Spirit, so that we could be restored, as we say in the liturgical text, to our original beauty, which would be restored to who we are, governed by our true self, and not governed by our passions, or not governed by death and corruption, not governed by the body. Let's go back to Wisdom of Solomon. And let's look at chapter 9. Yes, it's chapter 9. And let's start at verse 13. Start at verse 13. See, Kyle, you want to read it for us? Or you have an Orthodox study Bible there?
Yes.
Okay.
Chapter 9, 13, you said?
Yes.
For what man will know the counsel of God? Or who will think about what the Lord wills? For the reasoning of mortals is cowardly, and our intents are unsafe. For a corruptible body weighs down the soul, and this earthly tent burdens a heart full of thoughts. We can barely form a conjecture of the things upon the earth, and the things at hand we find with toil. But who has searched out the things in the heavens? Who has known your counsel, unless you give, or who has known your counsel, unless you have given him wisdom and sent him your Holy Spirit from on high? And thus the paths of the earth, or thus the paths of those on earth were made straight, and mankind was taught what pleases you, so that they were saved by wisdom.
And wisdom again is Christ. It's Christ. So you see here the condition that we're in this world. The body and the darkened mind and, the fragmented soul weighs down on us, and it darkens us. So we have the world of light and life, of vibrance, the world of the church, and then we have the world of fallenness, that we exist in. We're just weighed down. I mean, honestly, during Lent, especially perhaps, as we strive to do the ascetical disciplines, what do we discover? How heavy we are, right? How to do the ascetical disciplines, it's just really hard. And then to fast with the stomach is one thing, but then to start dealing with the thoughts, and then start dealing with all the movements in the soul, anger, lust, greed, hatred even. all of these forces that are just constantly moving in us, they weigh us down to the point that we can actually become depressed, you know, and sick of soul, if not sick of body. We can become very discouraged. We can become so darkened by all of this that we think that we can't see the light. And we can even begin to think that there is no light. When I hear the stories of people, I may forget my own stories, I can get depressed. I mean, you know, just the misery that we live in and even accept as normal because we're so used to it. This is the state of the world as it exists. It is this, and yet the beauty of it is that it's in this darkened world, with all its misery and corruption, that the church exists. She's in the darkness, but if she is the light of Christ, then she is the light that darkness cannot extinguish. And this is the beauty of the church. And yet the darkness wants to convince us that the light is not shining. Cindy?
Well, and Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest."
You know, you say that, and suddenly I'm thinking of this passage. All you who are heavy laden by the corruption that weighs down on you.
As well as the whole, his yoke is easy and his burden is light. You know, all of those things, sayings in the gospel are enlightened by these words here.
They're given a different or a deeper context too.
Yes, yes. But it connects them.
I want to read this from St. Isaac of Nineveh. Now, St. Isaac of Nineveh, he was of Syria. He was a monastic living in the 7th century. He describes world. He says the meaning of the word world in biblical terms. He says, world is a collective noun which is applied to the so-called passions. But if a man does not know first what the world is, he will never come to know with how many of his members he is distant from the world, and with how many he is bound to it. Many are the persons that with 2 or 3 members have parted from the world, and curbed themselves with respect to these, and suppose themselves to be strangers to the world in their way of life. This, however, is because they neither understand nor prudently see that with 2 of their members they have died to the world, while their remaining members live within the body of the world. Howbeit they have not even been able to perceive so much as their passions. And since they have no awareness of them, neither have they made an effort to heal them. That's what St. Isaac is writing in the 7th century. And now I would like to read from St. Macarius the Egyptian in the 4th century. He says, the world of Christians is one thing. Their way of living, their mind and speech and action is one. And the way of living and mind and speech and action of the men of this world is another. Those are one thing and these another, and the difference between them is great. And then skipping over here, he says, not in a form or in outward figures, lies the distinguishing mark of Christians. Most men think that the difference which distinguishes themselves from the world consists in a form and in figures. I think what he means is that we think we're different from one another because, well, you're tall and I'm not so tall. Maybe things like that. You're young, I'm old. You're from this nation, I'm from that nation. I'm thinking he might mean that, but he's going to bring this into the world of the church. Most men think that the difference which distinguishes themselves from the world consists in the form and in figures. And so in light of what he's going to say further on, I would interpret him here to mean to say that we Christians think that we're different from everybody in the world because we're Christians. You know, we observe the sacraments, we know the Bible, we read the Bible, we're nice, da-da-da-da-da-da. So he goes on to say, and lo, in mind and frame they are like the world, undergoing the same shaking. What he means here is the shaking of the devil, who sifts the minds of the children of this age with restless thoughts, and by the ceaseless tossing of earthly businesses and desires and of tangled material notions, Satan waves their souls about. As he sifts in this sieve of earthly businesses the whole sinful race of men, ever since Adam fell by transgressing the commandment and came under the power of the prince of wickedness. From the time when he gained this power, he does nothing but sift with thoughts of deceit and agitation all the sons of this age and dash them on the sieve of the earth. Then he goes on to describe that in that metaphor in more detail. Then he go back over to here. He says they're undergoing the same shaking, the same inconstancy of thoughts, and unbelief and confusion and helter-skelter as all other men. In outward form and appearance, yes, they differ from the world. They're Christians, those are pagans. And in a few points of religious ordinances, they're different from everybody else in the world. You know, we're Orthodox, they're not. But in heart and mind, they are bound with earthly bounds, never having acquired rest from God and the peace of the heavenly Spirit in their heart, because they never sought it from God, nor believed that he would vouchsafe these things to them. And then he goes on to say in this passage, it's the fifth homily, very few, however, are they who supply a good beginning with a good end, and come through to the end without falling, with no love but one, for God only, and detached from all else. Many are pricked at heart. Many become partakers of heavenly grace. He's giving the reason why we have a catechism, why we don't just let you waltz into the church as soon as you think you want to come into the church. Many are pricked at heart. Many become partakers of heavenly grace. Many are smitten by the beauty of the Orthodox faith. And why shouldn't they be? It's beautiful. It is beautiful. It's the real deal. But because of the conflicts and struggles and labors and different temptations of the devil to be borne on the way, they do not hold out, but are occupied with different and diverse worldly desires. Because everyone has some worldly thing that he chooses to love, and has not detached his affections all around. So they have stopped short, and they've been plunged in the deeps of the world through the feebleness and slackness and cowardice of their own wills, or through some worldly affliction. Do you desire to reign with Christ through ages without end? Well, will thou not readily welcome the conflicts and labors and temptations of this short span of life, even unto death? Most men wish to attain the kingdom and would like to inherit eternal life, but do not refuse to live to their own wills and to follow them out. Not denying themselves, they wish to inherit eternal life. But this is impossible. You hear what he's saying? He's describing the two worlds. You hear the two worlds? There's this world of death, what St. Isaac calls the world of the passions, where we are weighed down by the corruption of death and tossed about by the passion. That's this world. And then there's the world of the kingdom of heaven, church. And you don't just by believing, you don't just suddenly, bang, you're in the other world. If one believes in Jesus, as St. Macarius says, it means you're going to follow him. But if you're going to follow him, you're going to follow him through the wilderness, where you are going to be tempted by the devil, as he was. The wilderness is your own soul. You're going to follow him all the way into the tomb, where and on the way you're going to be buffeted and ridiculed, and persecuted by the Pharisees, the scribes, the self-righteous, even by your own self, your own passions, until you finally die with Christ. And then when you follow him from the tomb, you're going to go with him into Galilee. You're going to go with him into your everyday life. You're going to follow him up the mountain to your grave, which is the summit of the mountain. And that's where you open out under the kingdom of heaven. The point is that to get from this world to that world requires a journey of following Christ and doing spiritual battle. And it's a battle of choosing to go with Christ and not to go with the seductions and the temptations of the passions. So, in my experience and from what I've read, the center of the battle to get from here to there is the heart. It's the heart. It's one's own desires, one's own choice. And that's what, to become Orthodox is more than just to believe that everything the Orthodox Church says is true. To become Orthodox means to deny yourself, take up your cross, in other words, take up the ascetical disciplines of the Church, those are the cross, and learn to lose your life for the sake of Christ. You have, as one person said it, in the Orthodox faith, we don't believe, we become. So to be Orthodox is to take up the cross and embark on this. I call it the inner exodus of the soul, following the prophets actually. Embark on this inner exodus of the soul into the kingdom of heaven. So with that, the question I want to ask is, so we have these two worlds, the world of the church and the world of the world of the passions. And as I said, the beauty of it is that the world of the church has come into the world of the passions. I mean, if the church is Christ's body, and Christ has become flesh to the point of dying on the cross and descending into the tomb, you see, that's where all of us are. You know? So he is in the darkness, and he's in the sickness and the misery of the darkness. That's where he is. He's in my darkness. So he's in the tomb. So the church, the light of God, the uncreated light of God, is in my darkness, in my death. So then I ask the question, from this I ask the question. I want you to consider the question. How do you get from here to there? How are you going to get from here to there? How are you going to get from this world to the world of the church? Where's the gate? Where's the gate? Well, okay. No takers? Let's go to Proverbs. Is it? No, Jeremiah. Let's start out with Jeremiah. Well, yeah, in your Orthodox study Bibles, with Jeremiah. Jeremiah 17. Come on, where are you? Yeah, why am I not finding it? Verse 7. Oh, there it is. Yes, here we go. 17, verse 9. Yes, Rachel already knows what we're talking about. The heart is deep beyond all things, and it is the man, and who can know him? I, the Lord, try the hearts and prove the reins, to give to everyone according to his ways and according to the fruits of his devices. Listen, do you hear that? The heart is deep beyond all things. So, Anna, you be this person that I was talking to the other Sunday, last Sunday, and get the answer right. Where is the heart relative to quantum physics?
Outside.
Yes, very good. So what does it say? The heart is deep beyond all things. Where's the heart relative to cosmic reality? It's beyond it. It's beyond it. That's why to know, you know, if you let's say the cosmic reality is what it is that makes it to be what it is. So the heart is the who that is beyond the what. But the who, the heart, is inside the what, hidden in the what, in the tomb. So you can see that in the heart, which is deep beyond all things, that's where you come to that place where, how would you say, the what crosses over into who. You might consider. So that's where the point of the boundary you might see it there. But then let's go now to St. Macarius again. Chapter 11, verse 11. When you hear that, let's see. Yeah, when you hear that at that time the Lord delivered the souls from hell and darkness and went down to hell and did a glorious work. Remember, St. Macarius is in the 4th century. Do not imagine that these things are so very far from your own soul. In other words, what he's saying, this is what he's trying to say, that when we're preaching the gospel in the church, we're not preaching about something that happened 2,000 years ago. Yes, we are preaching about something that happened 2,000 years ago. But you understand that what happened 2,000 years ago is the visible. It's history. And the visible opens onto the invisible realm of the heart. So it's like 2,000 years ago, that's the gate, that's a gate that opened onto the invisible realm of the heart. So when you come into the invisible realm of the heart, you're also in that moment of the history 2,000 years ago. You follow what I'm saying? So when we preach the gospel, we're talking about then, today. And you'll hear it in the liturgical texts of the church. At every feast. When does every feast happen? On what feast? On what day is every feast happening? Today. Today. Today, the Virgin gives birth to the transcendent one. In the church, we're in this times today. And it's like what St. Clement says all the way back in the early 2nd century, late 1st century. The church not only exists now, but has been in existence from the beginning. And the word there actually is the same word that is used in John chapter 2, I believe it is, when Jesus tells Nicodemus, you must be born again. It's the same word. It has different meanings. It can also mean from above. In the deep, it could also mean in the deep. Way in the deep. So the church is not only now, it's not only here in the visible, it's also in the deep, is how you could translate what he's saying, what St. Clement is saying. And then going back to St. Macarius. So man is capable of admitting and receiving the evil one. Death keeps fast hold of the souls of Adam, and the thoughts of the soul lie imprisoned in the darkness. When you hear of sepulchres, do not think only of visible ones. Your own heart is a sepulchre and a tomb. When the prince of wickedness and his angels burrow there and make paths and thoroughfares there, on which the powers of Satan walk into your mind and thoughts, are you not a hell, a tomb, a sepulchre, a dead man towards God? There it was that Satan coined reprobate silver. In this soul he sowed seeds of bitterness. It is leavened with old leaven. A fountain of mire springs there. Well then, the Lord comes into souls that seek after him. Notice how the Lord honors our freedom. He does not go into the souls of those who don't want him, but those that seek after him. And this takes us back, actually, to wisdom of Solomon, and also, I think, to Proverbs, where we have, and even in Isaiah, actually several places in the prophets, where it says, in one form or another, the Lord is near to those who call upon him. And didn't we just read it from wisdom? The Lord loves those who seek after. Wisdom loves those who seek after her, and she is found by those who seek diligently for her. Well, here it is. The Lord comes into the souls that seek after him. How would one express the one's desire to seek after him? Let's pause just real quickly. How would you express that? How would that be manifested? I seek thee, O Lord. I want to know thee, O Lord. Okay, how do I go about doing that? Prayer. Descending with the mind into the heart. In other words, being authentic, being yourself, taking the masks off, and standing in the presence of God, heart to heart, face to face, eye to eye. And second, doing what he tells us to do. Doing his commandments the best that we can do. That's how we start seeking after the Lord. So even more important than reading the books, which is a good thing to do, but much more important than that is to seek the Lord through prayer and action. So well then the Lord comes into souls that seek after him, into the deep of the heart hell. He comes into the deep of the heart hell. And there he lays his command upon death, saying, bring out the imprisoned souls that are seeking after me, which thou dost detain by force. So he breaks through the heavy stones that lie on the soul. He opens the sepulchres, raises up the man that is dead indeed, brings out of the dark jail the imprisoned soul. Well, finally, let's just quote one more passage, and then we'll spend the rest of the minute that's left talking about things. In this would take me to Matthew chapter 7, verse 45. Anybody remember what it says? It says, "For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few." Why would it be few? Didn't was it Macarius? I think St. Macarius has just told us. Let me see if we can go back to that. Few, very few, are found who have taken up a love like this, renouncing all the pleasures and desires of the world, and enduring patiently the assaults and temptations of the evil one. There is need for much faith, patience, conflict, and endurance, and labor, and hunger and thirst for what is good, to obtain the kingdom without trouble. For to obtain the kingdom without trouble or pains or sweat is a thing impossible. For one thing, the Lord acquired. He opened the way through much toil, trouble, and sweat. But he opened the way so that we can go through it. But in order for us to get through the way, what makes it so hard? What makes it so hard? Our will, our own self-love, our arrogance, our pride, our lack of humility. This is what makes it so hard. I don't want to die. My pride doesn't want to die. That's what makes it so hard. So, when one, let's just kind of wrap this up. As some of us are getting ready to become Orthodox, come into the church. The Catechism is a period of forming you, like you're formed in your mother's womb, those 9 months. And you're getting ready to be born, and to come out into the world and start walking with your own feet, your own power. To become Orthodox, when you don't just believe that Jesus is my personal Savior and bang, you're in. Yes, I mean, when you believe that Jesus is your personal Savior, you're on the path, but it's like you're at this side of the lake. You stepped into the rowboat, and now you got to get to the other side of the lake. You're like the Israelites. They've come through the Red Sea. They've been baptized. Pharaoh and all of his armies are destroyed behind them. Miriam is so giddy that she gets up and she starts dancing. She dances the night away. And then she gets up in the morning, and what did they discover? Oh, there's a wilderness we got to go through to get there. So to become Orthodox is to follow Christ as the Israelites followed Moses through the wilderness. It's to follow Christ into the wilderness of our soul. And working, to choose, working on my will, to unite myself to Christ, and not to the passions that want me to unite myself to them. That means that I have to say no to all of those passions that all of these years I've said yes to. And it just seems to be a phenomenon of spiritual existence, that all those habits I was saying yes to are going to come back, so that I now have a chance to say no to them. But that's when I might discover how much I still love them. And so to say no to those habits it's going to call out. It's going to test my heart. It's going to test my will. So when you find yourself having been received into the church, I warrant that when you are received into the church, you'll be like most of those who are received in the church. There's a palpable joy. You know that you have been anointed with the Holy Spirit. There's no doubt. But that's just to let you know that it's real. And that what has happened to you is not your imagination. But from that moment, you're going to be called now to go into the wilderness of your soul. And sooner or later, you're going to enter into battle. And when that happens, you should not think, oh, I've fallen off the path. I've made a mistake. The Lord doesn't love me anymore. That's not what's happening at all. You're right where you should be. You're on the path. And you're making your way for the wilderness, to the tomb of your heart where Christ is, ready to raise you from the dead and lead you up the mountain into Galilee. But you are on the path and you're doing exactly what you should be doing. You're fighting the passions in the power of Christ now. That's another thing one has to learn, is how to fight the passions in the power of Christ and not on one's own power. How to fight the passions and how to give one's will to Christ, even when one wants to give one's will to the passion. That's when the self-love comes into play, and that's when the battle can become incredibly fierce, such that fasting with the stomach is like child's play. My point is, I guess that's what Tom, Matthew, that's the question. Are you ready? Are you ready to go into battle? But here's the kicker. If you choose not to, well, where are you going to go? Into hell. The kingdom of heaven is over here. And that's where we want to go. But my point also is that when you find yourself in the battle, don't despair and think that you have somehow failed or made a mistake. Not at all. That's when you come to the church, make your confession. That's when you come to the church, you receive Holy Eucharist, get the strength of the Lord. That's when you come to the church at Vespers, the services, the week, and get the prayers, and have your soul strengthened, have wisdom teaching you, strengthening you, giving you understanding, so that you can go out and you can fight the battle in the power of the Lord. And it's the Lord who will lead you. I would testify that the battle is hard, but I don't want no other battle. I would testify that this is where I want to be. This is the battle I want to fight. Okay, questions? Comments? Observations? What do you think? Shall we say a prayer and then we can close? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Truly it is me to bless you, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, and the Mother of our Lord. More honorable than the cherubim, and more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim. Without corruption dost thou give birth to God the Word, to Theotokos, we magnify thee. Christ is in our midst.
He is in your show.
All right, guys. Well, we'll see you next Tuesday, after we see you a number of other times between now and then.